I don't usually wear bright, festive shirts, but I thought I would for today's Theology Thursday because we're going to talk about festivals, specifically festivals that we find in the Old Testament, and talk some about what they mean and how they connect and apply to us and those kind of things. So, this is an English Bible. I use the English Standard Version. And we have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. We have 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. So we have a certain order to the books in our Bible, and that's, if you have read the Bible and are familiar with it, that's what you're used to. The Hebrew Bible has the same 39 books that we have, and here's a copy of the Hebrew Bible. But this actually is in a different order. The first 5 books are arranged the same. In fact, the first 7 books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. But then it's Samuel and Kings. Then Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the book of the 12, which we know is the minor prophets. So it is arranged somewhat differently. Now, here's the reason I say that. Because if we go over to the Hebrew Old Testament is divided into 3 sections. So if we go over to the third and final section, we find Psalms, and these are known as the writings. And following Psalms, we're going to have Job, and then following Job, we're going to have Proverbs. But then we come to a little section in the Hebrew Bible called the Megillah. And it means the 5 little scrolls. Now, the reason this is important is because each of these 5 scrolls connects with a different festival. There were 5 festivals given in the Old Testament. And so we have a scroll that connects to or relates to each of these 5 festivals. So I'll just go through them quickly for you. The first one is Ruth, and that is Pentecost. And this would make sense because it's a harvest festival, and Ruth meets the love of her life, Boaz, during harvest time. So you can see why it would be done a harvest festival. And so Ruth is the first of the little 5 scrolls. The next we have Passover. The Song of Solomon is the one that's connected with Passover, and probably because it is a love song. And Passover was the greatest exhibition of God's love for Israel that we have in the Old Testament. And so they would read the Song of Solomon. But the next one is interesting. And that is the Festival of Booths or Tabernacles, Sukkoth. And basically they would put a tent in the backyard and sleep in it. And they would read Ecclesiastes. And so some have wondered, why Ecclesiastes? It's kind of a negative, pessimistic book. And Booths is supposed to be the biggest celebration that they have because it is to remember we used to live in tents in the wilderness, and now we have this beautiful and wonderful land that God has given us with cities and houses and wells and fields and all of this. So some believe that Ecclesiastes was read to calm people down a little bit so that the big party did not get totally out of control. And so I'm not really sure, but anyway, Ecclesiastes is the next book. Next little scroll that would be read during one of these festivals and during the Festival of Booths. Then we get an interesting one. We get Lamentations. And Lamentations in the English Bible follows Jeremiah because Jeremiah is the author, but actually is one of the festival scrolls. And this was for the 9th of Av, and that is to commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple that Solomon built by the Babylonians in 586 BC. And it laments the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And then the last one we have is the book of Esther. And this would make total sense with Purim because when we get to the end of the book of Esther, it actually says that they celebrated this festival every year called Purim. So let me give it to you in chart form so you can see it. And so here it is. And if you want to try to write this down or something, you're certainly welcome to do so. So I'll leave it up there for a second, or you can pause and look at it. But anyway, so we have these 5 festivals, the 5 scrolls, and then what they commemorate, each of those. So in the Old Testament, they have 5 festivals. So then that raises the question, what's the purpose? Why do we have these festivals in the Old Testament? Why did God give them? Well, there are at least 3 reasons that we would find festivals in the Old Testament. And then there are some other kind of subplot, so to speak. The obvious first purpose of having a festival is to remember or commemorate something. They commemorate or they remember the destruction of Jerusalem, or they're celebrating that God has given them a harvest again this year, or they are remembering that they used to be in tents, but now they're in houses and how good God's been to them. And so there's a remembrance and a celebration and commemoration kind of element to it. A second reason is because this is how we are naturally as human beings. What I mean by that is God has built into us a need for some special days. I mean, we see this from the very beginning. You'll work 6 days, but the 7th day will be a Sabbath, a day of rest. So there's already this kind of a rhythm built into the week where there is a day that's different than the rest. And so you and I need times set apart just to remember, to celebrate, to commemorate. For example, in our American society, we'll celebrate birthdays. New Year's, for many people, is a big celebration, a big New Year's Eve celebration. We remember and commemorate and honor dads on Father's Day and moms on Mother's Day. If you're married, you have anniversaries. We have a Memorial Day where we honor those that have given their lives for our freedoms and for our country. We have Veterans Day where we again, honor those that have served in the military to protect and preserve and expand our freedoms in the world. We have Thanksgiving, which is kind of the American equivalent of a harvest festival, like Ruth, Pentecost. And then, of course, we celebrate Christmas, we celebrate Easter. So we have days as well. God just kind of designed us to want to have some special days of recognition and remembrance and celebration. There's another purpose. All of these festivals were a full day, and they were not to do anything normal. So they were supposed to stop and to consider God and His work in our lives. Whether that work was discipline with the destruction of Jerusalem, whether that is God providing for us through a harvest or through booths where we were reminded that He delivered us from Egypt and we were in the wilderness and God protected and preserved, Passover. We want to stop on those days and consider what God has done, who He is, and how He has worked in our lives. But there's so those are the 3 main purposes: to remember or commemorate or celebrate, because it's part of the natural way God has designed us from the very beginning, and for us to stop and have a special day of worship reflection. But there are a couple other reasons that we have that are not primary reasons, but also kind of sub-reasons or secondary reasons. They break the monotony of life. You work and you rest. You work and you rest. You work and you rest. And so to have a day that's different than the others, a day to focus on someone or some event or something is good. It causes us to pause and reflect, but it breaks the monotony of just kind of regular life. To have a day like July 4th that we set apart. It's just different. We don't shoot fireworks every day. We don't do picnics every day. But it's nice to have a day that kind of breaks up the routine, brings a little something different into our lives. But one of the things I find fascinating about these 5 festivals that we find in the Bible, they really don't add any in the New Testament, but the reason we find these 5, or the thing about these 5 that we find that is most interesting to me is not all of them are celebration. Sometimes they're a call for us to stop and reflect. The destruction of the city in 586 was not cause for celebration. That's why it's the book of Lamentations. They lamented the loss. They remember what they had, but no longer have. But you don't want to let those memories go. You want to keep them. And the same is true for you and me. There are days where we stop and remember. If you're in Israel, every year there's Holocaust Remembrance Day, where they set aside a day to remember the Holocaust. If you live in America, every year there is, in a number of places across our country, but particularly in Washington and New York City and some others, where we stop and we remember 9/11 and the attack on the Twin Towers. So those are somber, reflective days. And those days are important as well, because we don't just remember, hey, let's celebrate God a great harvest, and remember He delivered us out of Egypt and all that good stuff. But also at times we just need to stop and reflect and remember. Sometimes we stop and reflect and remember because we don't want it to happen again. Sometimes we stop because we want to honor and we don't want to lose the memory of others. I can remember a few years ago, we were going somewhere, and we're in the car going down the road, and my wife had been quiet for a little bit, and I looked over, and I see she's crying. And being a typical man, my first thought was, what have I done now? But I just said, are you okay? And like a typical female, yes. And, no, you're not. You're crying. And shame on me that I didn't remember, but she did, that it was her dad's birthday. And her dad had passed away a number of years before. And just going down the road, it just kind of hit her that your dad's no longer here. And she remembered him. And so sometimes, birthdays can be a time of celebration, certainly for kids and grandkids and all, or that milestone, when you turn 18, or when you turn 30, or when you turn 50, you realize, wow, I'm halfway to 100. When you turn 65, there are some of those significant ones that we celebrate as well. But there are also days like that bring up mourning. Many, many people, quite a few probably watching this, that for years you celebrated your anniversary, but now it's a day of remembrance because your spouse is no longer here. And those are okay too. Matter of fact, I think we need those. God gave this, a couple of them in the Bible. And so there are days of celebration, but there are also days to stop and reflect and to be thankful for the people that God has put into our lives that are no longer here, and to remember them. But that also is a day of sadness and reflection. So they're both kind of festivals that we have. And so I just want to encourage you, because we're kind of in the middle of what we would call the American festival season. It kind of kicks off with Thanksgiving, and then, of course, there's all the stuff that goes on leading up to Christmas, not just Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, but the office parties and all kinds of Christmas parties that we go to and things. Some people travel at that time, and we follow that up a week later with New Year's, and just so it's kind of a lot of Americans call it the holiday season. So during this time, I hope you'll celebrate and rejoice, just like the Bible gives us opportunities and commands to do so. But also I know for some people there's some sadness as well. This is the first year without mom or whoever it is at Christmas. And so don't feel bad about taking a few moments and think about them and honoring and reflecting on their life and how blessed you are that God had them in your life, at least for a time. So God bless you, and I hope that this holiday season will be a festival season for you to remember and celebrate how great our God is.